Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious
Treksperts. We are. I was trying to create some drama, but it didn't quite work. I got to tell you guys, in the history of Inglorious Treksperts, there's probably no more controversial subject than Star Trek 3 for some reason. I'm not sure why, but apparently it is. So for our 300th episode, we thought we would assemble a trio of the biggest Star Trek 3 fanboys we could find to defend it from the slings and arrows of outrageous Treksperts. And they're going to explain why they think it's a great film. So to do this, we'd like to welcome back Picard Season 3 showrunner and 12 Monkeys showrunner, Terry Matalas. Welcome back, Terry.
Thank you.
The president of 20th Century Studios, Steve Asbell.
One of us.
Steve has nothing to say. And making his first appearance on the Treksperts, and we hope not the last, is the president of Marvel Studios, here in his capacity as a Star Trek fan, Kevin Feige.
Hey, everybody. My first time for real, but I've been here in spirit for many years. So thank you for having me on officially.
First time caller, long time listener.
Very excited.
You're there like Gene Roddenberry is often with us. You're with us in spirit.
That's right. But DAREN doesn't do an imitation.
I am alive. I am alive.
You're alive.
Mark, do you want to? Is my audio not working yet, or no?
No, you're fine.
We hear you.
I'm sorry. I'm self-conscious.
We can hear you,
You
Carol.
want to mention the anniversary of the year of what?
Well, I was just going to get to that, but thank you for teeing it up there, Steve. One of the other things that's unique is 1984 is, of course, the 40th, make us feel old, anniversary of the release of Search for Spock, Star Trek 3, which came out in 1,996 theaters across North America. It's the same summer as Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Ghostbusters, and Top Secret. And it grossed a whopping $16 million in its opening weekend, which was actually the highest opening weekend gross of all time, breaking Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan's record. And but it would not go on to make the kind of money that Wrath of Khan did. It petered out at around 76 million in North America for a total of 87 million worldwide, which was actually pretty sizable box office at the time.
And what was Wrath of Khan?
Wrath of Khan was a little over 80 domestically, but Star Trek 3 cost more.
Yeah. Star Trek what did it go up? Because did it go up against Ghostbusters? It was summer. I remember I watched it in summer camp. They dropped us off at the movie theater.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys that about, and that's a good place to start. What were your first experiences seeing Star Trek? And Terry, you started talking about it, your experience of going to a theater and seeing it for the first time. I'd love to know where you saw it, what your experience was like, and what was your opinion, if you remember, of the film and how it has evolved over the years.
Well, it hasn't evolved much. I loved it. It's one of the first movies that I remember seeing in the theater because I saw it. It's actually probably the first movie I saw multiple times. I went opening weekend with my parents, who were big Star Trek fans. I was 9, and all of it burned into my DNA. I mean, there's a reason Space Doc it appears in Picard season 3 because I wanted to have Space Doc again for so long. It was and so and then DAREN, how do you not like Space Doc? What kind of monster?
It's big and stupid looking.
Show us on the doll where Space Doc
after the grace of Dry Dock in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Look, we'll go into this later. I don't want to. I don't want to
scaffolding of Dry Dock.
I don't want to bury my lead.
You know, I mean, 84 was a big year. Yeah, Ghostbusters right after, so there's all that. But you know, I certainly at that point had been raised on Wrath of Khan. You know, my dad had bootleg illegal VHS tapes back in the day. He was one of the first people. So I had seen Wrath of Khan, and I you know, it's just, I love. For me, it's one of the first real, even though I've watched original series stuff, it's one of the first real introductions to Star Trek, and it's probably why the more emotional sort of family crew as a family stories resonate the most with me.
And by the way, Terry, totally unrelated, congratulations. It's the first anniversary of the debut of Picard season 3. And I can't believe it's a year. And as
Wow.
everyone knows, it's
Awesome. Congrats,
something
man.
we all can agree on that we do love. So
Thank you. Well,
Mazel
I appreciate
tov.
that. Thank you.
Kevin, what about you? What was your first experience with Search for Spock? Do you remember?
I remember the posters for it in the theaters, and I'm actually not sure if I saw it in a theater or if I saw it on video afterwards. Wrath of Khan I did not see in a theater. Wrath of Khan was one of those movies that I discovered back in the day when HBO would just show the same thing over and over and over and over. And I only saw it in bits and pieces. So I may have seen 3 in a theater, but it was certainly on video that I started rediscovering them. And then by the time 4 came out, I saw that in a theater a million times. I was like fully on board and explaining to people the glasses that he got in Star Trek 2 and then sold in Star Trek 4. And so by that point, I'm totally into it. But I don't know if I actually saw it in a theater. I think I was too busy seeing, yes, Ghostbusters and Temple of Doom over and over.
But your parents weren't Star Trek fans?
No, they took me to see the motion picture when I was, that was 79, the motion picture.
Yeah.
So whatever, I was 6 years old and slept through most of it.
Did you find Dry Dock elegant?
Great.
Extremely. And by the way, all the effects in that movie are probably the best of the whole series. And that dry dock sequence and the Goldsmith score that goes along with it, I used to listen to in my bedroom as a kid and like get much too excited than one should. I would imagine like what kids were doing when they were going to see Duran Duran. I would stay in my room listening to the Enterprise track and contend that it's better than
you've just gained a point on my listing here.
That classic Duran Duran song, Geeks on Film. So Steve Asbell, what about you? You remember your first experience?
Similar. I mean, I do remember seeing it on screen. But what was interesting about it was, I think after having gone through, Empire to Jedi, like what was happening in my grade school, I was, again, we're around the same age, that we were really interested in the sort of cliffhangers, back where we would, wait 3 years for each one, or 2 in this case, and kind of theorize about what, like, that was really fun. And I don't think there were any other movies other than Star Wars and Star Trek at that time that really had that sense of, especially after Empire, obviously the big one was the first one. We were like, what the fuck, raging debates about whether he's really his father or not. But then not when we finished, we were talking about 3 and coming out of it, all I would remember was that the big debate was they were going to get the Excelsior. Like that was the big thing, that they were going to come back, and they like, we didn't even think about, are they all going to get, shit canned from Starfleet? But we were like, no, what's going to happen is this, and they're going to turn the Excelsior into Enterprise. And it was like that, the earliest memory I have of really talking to my friends about what could happen in the next movie. And it was like those, I remember those two, like 80 to 85, kind of those Star Wars and Star Trek being.
You mean like, is Boba Fett Han Solo's mother and stuff like that? Yeah. Fantastic.
Well, yes, and Han Solo being the other because he used Luke's lightsaber to cut open the Tauntaun. That was
he was the only other character to ever wield a lightsaber other than a Jedi.
Oh, really?
Yes, that argument was made throughout the lunchroom, as I recall.
But can I just say something about that? I do miss the vacuum of information on a film. Now, I mean, obviously I just go online, any information I can get now about anything. But the dark ages of you didn't know what it was even going to be until that trailer came out, it's such a different experience because audiences' expectations are, they didn't really have them, they were just like, I don't know what they're going to do. And then the trailer would tell you. Now you have an entire community that can debate and basically break 10 versions of the movie that you're going to make before you, that you have to compete against. as a filmmaker. I just miss the nothing.
You know, I want to come back to this idea of the cliffhanger later because, of course, none of us were watching the old Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon serials, unless I'm mistaken, as kids growing up. So Empire was really unique in that it left on a cliffhanger, which was not something we had really experienced, having a major motion picture, sort of just abruptly end and with more story to tell. And then Star Trek 3, of course, it was very similar. Like, spoiler alert, he says, your name is Jim. James Horner's music swells. And we're like, okay, we're ready to go on this trip. And the movie ends. What was your feeling about how the picture sort of abruptly ends and sort of paves the way for the inevitable Star Trek 4? I'll start with you, Steve Asbell.
I didn't feel like it was as much of a cliffhanger in that way, in the sense that the story they were telling resolved with Spock being restored and resuscitated, and the idea that they I mean, I will recommend you all for promotion in whatever fleet we end up serving, that there was some openness to what was going to happen to them, but that it didn't matter in a sense because they had saved his friend's life. I mean, I actually think watching it again, Terry and I were going back and forth a little bit about it. Like, I just, the pace of the movie is really, like, I don't think about 3 as being the one that's really well paced. And yet, like, Stealing the Enterprise doesn't start till like 50 minutes in, 40 something minutes in.
Yeah.
And the movie ends exactly when it should, in a way.
Yeah.
Like, it's sort of on the absolute emotional moment of, like, not only have they, brought him back, but the big question of, he is not himself, is he going to be Spock again? Which is, of course, like the big magic trick of the movie. And then he just goes, your name is Jim, and you're out. And it's like, I actually felt more like, not that 2 was a cliffhanger, other than the fact that if you were not ready for Spock to die, maybe. But I guess, like I said, now I say that now, but back then I was like, oh, they're gonna be whatever. It was really just about them getting the Excelsior, to be honest, but which I love.
But it's interesting because back then it was 2 years between movies. 3 years between Empire and Jedi, but Star Trek was 2 years, which seemed a reasonable amount of time to wait. As opposed to like a Bond movie where you're waiting like 8 years for the next one to come out. But you make a really interesting point about this whole idea that Spock, emotionally, it's satisfying. What's interesting, it could be apocryphal, is Leonard told the story that the studio wanted to cut all the stuff on Vulcan, and whether that was financial or because they felt an audience that wasn't familiar with Star Trek wouldn't know what all this was, so they wanted them to save Spock and then basically get his Katra back in his body in sickbay on the Klingon bird of prey and end it there, because they felt that the action was the end and not the emotional thing at Occidental College. A pretty awful studio note, if it's true, wouldn't you say, Kevin?
Terrible, because that ending is so amazing, and that they take the time, that the movie essentially just stops to do this ceremony is awesome. But it also looks exactly like Amok Time. So if you are a fan, right, you're back on Vulcan there. I loved it, and I love all the shots of the crew looking on, and even Kirk pacing around while it's happening. As if what's going to happen. And it also, what is also super impressive is when Spock walks past.
Yes.
So actually, there's a chance that that's it. That's all the Nimoy you're getting, and then he stops and turns around, and that's the bonus. Your name is Jim is the emotional bonus. But it's so ballsy to just go, the search for Spock, his crystal face is the teaser poster, right? And yet you see him almost hardly at all in the entire movie until he turns back around and pulls his hood down. Yeah, pretty darn good.
Darren, I got to ask you, because there's been a lot of times where they've attempted to get Tom Hanks to play Zefram Cochrane, or Eddie Murphy in Star Trek 4. Put a big name in there. Now people don't realize, but at the time, getting Dame Judith Anderson from Rebecca to play the Vulcan priestess was like actually a pretty big deal.
It was for everyone except the young audience that had no idea who she was. Posthumously, We know how important she was and how what an iconic figure she cast. But I don't think anyone, certainly my age or younger, had any idea who the heck she was, other than the fact that she got a one-card credit up there. You know, that's great. Obviously, she is someone of note, and maybe someday I'll look her up and find out who she was. But you know, it's the look. The basic premise here is that we don't hate Star Trek 3. We enjoy it. We enjoyed it when we first saw it. The difference is that we, at least me, I am trying to separate my emotional connection with it with my intellectual curiosity and criticism of it.
That's very Vulcan of you.
You know, I can only try. I'm mostly human.
Well, we will try and mostly conduct a Faltor Pan and bring those things back together. Ashley,
yes, sir.
Ashley, you know, we've gone very easy on this, and we'll get to the more debatey part of this. But we're talking about sort of the ending, and as a cliffhanger or not as a cliffhanger, emotionally satisfying. You know, is it the right ending to a major motion picture? What was your feeling when you saw it? We didn't really hear from you. I'd love to hear what your thoughts, you know, were at the time.
Look, all of my reservations about the film notwithstanding, I think that it does a couple of things exactly right. One is stealing the Enterprise. Two is that it sticks the landing. And that last scene, I think, was perfect. Even at the tender age of 12, 13, when that came out, I loved that ending. And, you know, I think, Kevin, you nailed it when you said it was the bonus was Jim. Your name is Jim. Because suddenly it brought everything together. It wrapped it up in one line. And the great virtue of it is it didn't overstay its welcome. It understood that it was done, that it was over, that everything had been resolved. I think that movie clocks in at 105 minutes or something like that. Yeah. So it knows exactly what it is, and where it's going. And, you know, the stops along the way we can debate. But I love that ending. And in fact, I think the only real problem with that ending is it does kind of leave the franchise in a place where you think of it as the franchise, maybe not back then, but it does kind of leave the franchise in a place where, well, shit, everything is resolved. You know, what do you do now? And you kind of have to restart everything. And you do see an issue with that in 4 and 5 and 6. And there was never anything like that again in those Star Trek films. There were callbacks, certainly, and there were issues that resurfaced, but the story was done, and it ended beautifully.
Yeah. I also want to say I cheated. I changed the conditions of the test. I rewatched the movie before this podcast, and one thing I have to say, I've been very dismissive of Charles Correll's cinematography in the past. However, if you watch the new 4K, yeah, it's much better shot movie than I've given it credit for. And I think because we've looked at really bad transfers and TV masters over the last 40 years, and probably, you know, even the theatrical projection was pretty awful back in 1984. And it's a much better looking movie than I remember it, and particularly this Dakota, which they shot at Occidental College, is pretty. It's really well shot. It's well done, and it has some nice scope to it. As Gene Roddenberry called it, the Cecil B. DeMille ending that Leonard wanted.
Right.
But yeah, it does. It's got those beautiful wide shots, matte paintings as they may be. They're and they hits them a couple times, including that last shot of the movie.
And I would also say things like the mind meld where Sarek comes to see Kirk is really beautifully done. Like I had the same experience, Mark, watching the
tight shots on the
and just his lips and his eye, and it sells the emotion of something that could be pretty goofy. I mean, it can be goofy if done, you know, anything can be goofy if done wrong, but just in a cinematic way that had never been really attempted in because it never had an occasion to, I think, in the series, to make it not only he's reliving the emotional moment of Spock's death, but also the kind of sense of the invasion of a mind meld being like cinematic. Like I thought that was pretty good.
And I also, I realized that, well, probably not this time, but how the film educates you on the last conversation with Kirk and Spock, with the opening small desatch thing coming in. You play that, you do it again with Sarek, so that by the time you're with the end and Spock is then they're switching the words to get his memory. The audience, it knows what comes next, and it's so much more powerful. I just wanted to say, I think the MVP of the movie is James Horner, though. And,
Absolutely.
One of the criticisms I've heard people say is like, "Oh, he's just doing his Wrath of Khan." I not at all. Speaking again of Vulcan, because they sent this picture to Steve and Kevin before we came up, because I think we were all watching it right before we came on. But is the shot of the bird of prey landing on Vulcan and the lights on it, and James Horner it's so emotional, so powerful. Throughout, I think I often think every day, and I mean it every day, I wonder what James Horner would be composing if he were still alive. Like, what movies did we not? I mean, he would have
never met him. I never met him or got to work with him, but wish I had. And it was those two, Star Trek 2 and 3. And Cocoon, by the way. We'll do a Cocoon podcast with you guys someday, and I'll
and Alien.
That is maybe my favorite of all of his, but 2 and 3 are so good. And that beginning of the movie you mentioned, Terry, it's, I've worked on a lot of sequels, and there's a hesitancy that you don't want to have to tell a story in a new movie that will require a previously on, right? We would always joke, say, you don't want a previously on. But the truth is, they did it so well, and changing the color and starting smaller as it came is so beautiful that it's perfect.
Yeah.
I also just love the way that one and then 4 start essentially right where the last one ended, which we haven't done much in our movies, but I always liked it. Karate Kid 2, as you remember, also did that. I really liked.
And she's already dumped him after the prom. It's so crazy.
Back to your comment on the "Your Name Is Jim" scene. There again, Horner really hits the nail on the head, right? When Spock says that, he goes into the original theme.
It's great.
And that just, that melts you.
Lands it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For those of us who it meant something to, it was astonishing.
Yeah. Because they never play that in Wrath of Khan.
They hadn't ever played it.
Motion picture,
except motion picture twice.
Yeah.
But yes,
but
they hadn't gone for the jugular.
Yeah, it's the perfect place to do
it. We went to Horner a little sooner than I thought we were going to. I have to say that Kevin, I prefer his score for Cocoon: The Return, actually, and Cocoon.
It's a bad movie.
It's a terrible movie.
It's a great teaser poster and a great score.
How many bad movies have
Alan Silvestri Predator 2 is a better score than Predator.
I agree. Silvestri's score for Predator 2 is better.
I just want to add one quick thing on that front, because again, one of the fun things rewatching movies as an adult and a professional is kind of noticing things that that the audience thankfully doesn't. I was kind of amazed that, like, as I was watching it, there's no score for the entire David's death and then his grieving on the bridge, not until they start the self-destruct.
It's a really smart choice to leave that.
I was like, oh my God, there's no score. Like, which you could already be like, oh man, you gotta have it. It's pretty great.
No, I thought that was a
and we got to get to that, because we'll get to that. You killed my son.
All right, sorry, we're jumping. We can't help it. We're trying to.
No, I know. So much passion here.
I wonder if that has a mind of its own.
I did want to say that with Horner, I think that is a big part of why people who like the movie think it's a better movie than it is, because Horner it carries the movie on his back and elevate. I mean, it's a better score than Star Trek 2. He elevates the movie so much through this beautiful score, and he's adding an epic scope where none exists. He's bringing emotions where it's not quite earned, but it's so effective. And it was one of Harv Bennett's best decisions that when they agreed to have Horner do Star Trek 2, they said, we'll do it on the condition that you do Star Trek 3, because Horner didn't really want to do Star Trek 3, but he honored his commitment to do it because he'd given them his word, because they'd given him this huge break. to do Star Trek 2. Or he could have been stuck in Roger Corman land a lot longer. But it's
That'll be on the stars, not dissimilar to some of the
that's a polite word for it.
Music work,
similar.
Aliens has got the whole Klingon, like all that
Sure.
stuff he reuses.
Yeah, I want to because we're going to talk about what we like, what we love, what we don't like about the movie. I want to share with you real briefly what some other notables had to say. David Gerald says Star Trek 3 is a dreadful movie. There's no story there. It's still a wonderful picture because the characters are so wonderful. The scenes are so wonderful, and it's crisply directed. You don't care how bad the story is. D. Kelly played McCoy, for those of you at home who don't know. I enjoyed watching Star Trek 3 more than I did Star Trek 2. This one comes closer to the TV series than the others. Interesting point we'll come back to. Walter Koenig. I wish I could do the Walter Koenig voice like Darren, but I can't.
Say, Darren, you got it right here.
I felt it was too similar to Star Trek 2 in terms of the major conflict. The bad guys wanted the bomb, and we are trying to keep them away from it. It lacked a soul and a real emotional center, and it was not as good a story as Star Trek 2. Now we're getting to
the Mark. It was not as good a story as Star Trek 2 was, and I thought it was far similar to Trek 2.
What did you think of your costume design?
It's very good.
I wasn't
waiting for him to
told
walk off the stage.
I wasn't told that I could complain about my costume. I would have if I had known.
He's walking.
the pink Pushkin outfit.
Walken and Koenig are very similar.
Very close. So. Although Christopher Walken as Chekhov would be pretty great cast.
No,
I have two more comments that I think are really interesting. Roger Ebert said this is good but not great Star Trek. A sort of compromise between the first two. The first film was well, you're not going to like this, Darren.
Yeah, no,
the first film was a Star Wars road company that depended on special effects. The second movie, the best one so far, remembered what made the Star Trek TV series so special. Not its special effects, not its space opera gimmicks, but its use of science fiction as a platform for programs about human nature and the limitations of intelligence. And Janet Maslin, the New York Times, said Star Trek 3 finds the same old gang in a gloomy mood. Spock is dead. The Starship Enterprise is ready for mothballs. Even the crew's 23rd century leisure suits are beginning to seem passé. It's not hard to feel while watching the opening sections of the latest Star Trek series that you're getting a little too old for this kind of thing. And that they are too.
Objection. Are these contemporaneous accounts? Were these?
Yeah, these are contemporaneous.
They were all from 1984.
Okay. But then she starts to take the turn.
No further questions. No.
You remember back when there were actual,
real
movie
film
reviewers.
critics. But Star Trek 3
let me tell you, they really loved Star Trek and sci-fi in general. But
right. She pivots though, right? Because you jumped in too soon. But she says, but Star Trek 3, which opens today at nearly 2,000 theaters across the country, and dozens of them here, is helped by the gung-ho spirit with which the cast, director, and screenwriter approach their material. They all seem to believe wholeheartedly in the Star Trek saga, relishing every bit of jargon, every new space creature, every weep and bleep of their computer screens. Leonard Nimoy, who directed the third installment, hasn't matched the playfulness and energy of Star Trek 2, but he's way ahead of the first film, making up in earnestness what he lacks in style. That kind of conviction, while sometimes verging on undue self-importance, goes a long way towards making the material touching. And last but not least, one of the few times I ever agreed with this man, Ronald Reagan said, it wasn't a good film.
How dare he? Oh my God. I wasn't expecting that.
So that gives you, well, they showed it at the White House, and that was his response, but he probably slept through it. So
wow. Can you imagine? Was that was in the newspaper when it came out? President Reagan
said... it was in one of the books about his presidency by his chief of staff or something.
Oh, it wasn't publicized.
It wasn't publicized at the time.
It wasn't widely known at the time.
Yeah. But those were all contemporaneous accounts, which I thought would sort of be interesting as we begin our discussion. Ashley, tell us why this is a flawed movie, in your opinion. What about it doesn't work?
Oh, where do I begin? I mean, look, the and I've paid proper respects to the things that I think do work. And by the way, I also think the opening, recalling Star Trek II, works extremely well because it emotionally platforms everything that happens next. It establishes
Previously on Star Trek, yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't function like here's information you need to know to follow the plot. It's emotional context for where Kirk's head is at so that you understand the story that he's in, so that when you get to the end and your name is Jim, it all clicks. It is a story about the friendship between these two men. It is a story about grieving. It's about all those things. At least those are its intentions. I think where it starts to fall down is, in spite of the fact that I give it points for being for not wearing out its welcome, I do feel like it's kind of structurally all over the place. I like it, and we've talked about this when we did our commentary on Star Trek 3, but just the beginning sort of feels a little jumbled and weird. Like there are definitely story moments that don't necessarily make a hell of a lot of sense, like the bar scene with McCoy. Even though like I like some of the stuff that happens in that scene.
Love
There
that guy.
are
That
other
guy's the
story
greatest
questions
thing.
that arise.
Alan Miller.
Huh?
Alan
I don't
Miller
know who it was. He's fantastic, though.
as the alien.
Oh, the alien guy?
Yes,
Yeah,
With the ears, yeah.
It was just the premise of the scene I found weird. I don't understand why Sarek shows up and says, "You dicks left my son's body on Genesis. Screw you guys. I'm going home." Hey, man, how about a ship? You know, Dad, you're like the Vulcan ambassador. You can't swing like a Vulcan science vessel, you know, grease some bombs, do something. Even though that scene, by the way, is terrific.
Yeah.
My brain starts activating, which is always a problem. But beyond that, like I think I don't know that Christopher Lloyd was great casting, or at the very least. I mean, look, I think he's enjoyable and he's over the top, and it's Reverend Jim and he's a Klingon. But that's great. But he's not a great villain. He's merely okay. I do like that John Larroquette from Night Court is Maltz. I think that's pretty great. I think there's a whole
Terry and I had a whole
spin-off waiting to happen.
Maltz idea. Terry had a great idea.
Yeah, we got to talk. We got to swing back to Maltz later.
We'll get there.
Okay.
Letting Merritt Buttrick carry like the B story is not a great choice, people. He wasn't well cast really truly in the first place. He's some of the weakest castings from Star Trek 2, but he kind of worked in a context. When you've got BB Besh and you've got William Shatner kind of carrying him, he's fine. But when he's by himself and you have poor Robin Curtis, who is a lovely, wonderful human being and a great actress, who is being directed to be boring by Nimoy, what you've got are these very inert scenes that are happening against styrofoam. And holy crap, it kills the film. It kills the film. There's a bit of stupid Starship Captain syndrome where you've got JT Esteban, who is, I think, he makes John Harriman look like Jean-Luc Picard. And by the way, that's a deep cut.
Wait, are you just talking about how by the book he is? Are you talking about the?
He's just a little. He's just a little like.
The captain of the Grissom you're talking.
He's incompetent.
Exactly. He's
incompetent. He can't make a decision. He relies on his superiors to choose things for him. He is not decisive. He doesn't do anything correctly.
Right. At least Styles is just an a-hole.
To me,
it's like
I
kind of like Styles.
The most realistic version of what, like, I don't know. We've all been around. Well, I deal with people like that all the time.
Basically, all of us studio presidents. So it's fine. It's like just described.
This is where people are
I gotta go.
themselves.
I gotta go. Indecisive.
It's like, what if Steve Asbell was a starship captain?
Relying on other people's.
Steve, is that a fair criticism? Because they're saying, oh, well, he's not Kirk, right? He's not in command. He's not a leader. But do you need to be someone who is in charge, large and in charge, if you're a starship captain? Would someone like that get promoted to be captain of a ship who is so officious and so unable to make a decision?
I mean, the reason it never bumped me was that it was a science vessel that, basically was, I mean, I would, if anything, expect him to have some background in the sciences in some fashion, and kind of that would be his thing. But I didn't mind that he wasn't Kirk or, kind of one of those kinds of, Matt Decker type of captain, because he was like middle management. Like that's kind of what that was. And I actually kind of buy that he sort of is very cautious and kind of doesn't really know what to do in a real situation. Like when is he going to find himself in a moment like that where he's the only ship in the whole, cordoned off quadrant to kind of do this one thing that might change the whole galaxy. And he's like,
See,
I got to
opens
check
up
with
a whole other issue, Steve, but keep
I got to
going.
check with Starfleet. I don't want to do, yeah, he got the job.
It's also a hotly contested thing in Starfleet Genesis. They just made this planet, and it clearly is a major issue with them. So he's got to check in.
Wasn't it in the original outline that they'd done that it was more of a situation, like more ships, more?
Yeah, in Return to Genesis, yeah, the Romulans were actually mining dilithium on it, but it was they allude to the fact that this is a galactic controversy, and yet yet they just exploded the H bomb pretty much, and there are no other ships there except for this tiny little science vessel that is vulnerable. The Minnow, the SS Minnow, is the ship that we've sent out to the to watch the Trinity test.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest issue with it is like that's the guy that you're putting in charge there. I totally believe the Martinet Captain Styles in command of the Excelsior, and he's got his swagger stick, and it's like it's all about the post and it's all about that shit. And I find that very funny, and I dig it. But
again, it opens up the question: is there no one else competent in Starfleet other than Kirk and his crew? And that's the big question, because I like to think that anyone who is capable of commanding a starship has at least a modicum of ability. And
okay, to be fair, Darren, in the original series, anytime we ever met the captain of another ship, they were crazy, maniacal, or their body had been taken over.
Oh, not Commodore Wesley. Okay. Commodore Wesley was fine, and all the captains of the ships in the war games with the M5.
They didn't do so hot, man.
Yeah, because they were put up against an insane computer guy.
Kevin, I want to ask you, because everyone's going to say, yeah, but Star Trek 3 is great because it's stealing the Enterprise, right? I think everyone agrees stealing the Enterprise is great. But I think what Ashley was talking about is this first act, where they're coming home, they're depressed, Spock is dead, D. Kelly is sitting around speaking in tongues.
I love that. I love that opening. I think the notion of taking your time with the characters that you love, I wouldn't underrate that. And again, picking up from where it ended. And I think the brilliance of putting Spock's soul into McCoy is so cool. Like I remember being freaked out as a kid when you could hear Spock, and then with those, how did McCoy do those crazy, freaky, crazy eyes coming out of the shadow?
So good.
So good. I thought I was totally into that, and coming back into the dock and seeing I want to hang out in that lounge where you get there in those comfy chairs as an Enterprise.
We call it the Blue Bayou.
We call it the Blue Bayou because
you're exactly right.
They
That's
watch
what
the
it
ships
is.
come in.
I would love that.
Yeah.
And you have it.
Totally.
It's the Club 33 of Starfleet. So let me ask you this, because obviously that's you mentioned earlier the bar scene, which is clearly influenced by Star Wars. Now, without getting into the minutia, it's a shame that Charles Correll couldn't smoke it up, because they were using ILM opticals, and at the time you couldn't do it with a lot of smoke. They couldn't do that stupid little World War I fighter game, so it's really brightly lit. But Terry, you were saying you really are a big fan of Alan Miller's performance. That joke was created on the day, the ears thing, when they saw the makeup. It was an ad lib, but I think Hart Bennett threw it at them on the day, which is a great gag.
Great line.
What do you think of that whole Star Wars cantina bit?
It's funny. My mind never goes to Star Wars at all on it. I mean, I understand it's easy to do. I'm just so focused on DeForest Kelley. Like Bones is my favorite of all Star Trek characters, and he's so good. And then watching him try and charter a ship and not know how to do it, And I love the relationship with the waitress. She's like, "Oh, it's not your usual poison," and then do it like
He's
everything
been there
about
before,
it.
and you're like,
Again,
oh,
for me, it's
he used to go here.
yeah, exactly, and flirted with her. Who knows? Like, so it was a delivery system for DeForest Kelly for me. So I love it. And that guy is great. The makeup on that guy is great. That alien with the feathery thing, and
I mean, I always thought it was Star Wars. I always thought it was the lesser cantina, for sure, and going to book a ship. But I did love it. I did love that the weird fish looking backwards guy who talked like, I was like, oh, he's talking like Yoda. I guess that's
yeah.
And but what I really love is the nefariousness of the Starfleet security officer.
yeah, with the little bag.
And when he starts to talk, when McCoy's voice is going up too loud, and you realize Starfleet is not all, which the shows and the movies then really maybe too much so delve into. To your point of finding a decent captain, Starfleet is often the most corrupt place around in some storylines. But I liked that to me was one of the first times that you realized, oh, a security guy's going to muscle McCoy out of here.
I actually always thought that, and again, this is probably something we debated in the lunchroom, that they were following him, that guy just didn't happen to be there, but that the notion that he went home and was like recuperating, Kirk tells you, and then that guy was kind of on him.
Yeah, well, he side eyes him the second he walks in. That guy's clocking bones right away.
Also, not Bob Fletcher's finest moment. That waitress's outfit looks like something out of Buck Rogers, circa 1979.
In the makeup, in the makeup, there are a few things in the movie that do scream. Period. What I'm so impressed about with Wrath of Khan or Empire Strikes Back are these great classic movies of the early '80s that completely hold up. And if you see anything else that came out in that time, contemporary films that came out in that time period, you go, "Oh my God, this feels like a trillion years ago." And most Trek holds up for me. She felt of the period and not a 23rd century way.
Yeah.
I thought a lot of the costuming in general was kind of a disaster. Like once you're outside of uniform land. Oh, Terry, I'm dying to ask you. Like, so
we should talk about Kirk's leather jacket's amazing.
Okay.
Oh,
his jacket
is
wear that jacket.
great.
It's just I don't know about the rest of the ensemble.
Yes.
I would definitely not wear the
was good.
outfit.
Come on, he had like an overcoat situation.
McCoy's outfit is cool. I don't know how many layers are going on with that, but it's
many
cool.
layers. It took him a while to get dressed, but it was cold outside. It's very cold in space.
It's Chekhov that's the most question.
Yes.
What is happening there? Did he dress himself in the dark? What was going on?
He thought it was a good idea.
Well, look, I mean, the story is that Bob Fletcher was trying to take something from character for each of them. So for Sulu, he went for like a kind of samurai with the cape and everything like that. And for Kirk, he did. And no, but that was what he said. Each one was derived from a character. The problem is Chekhov had no character, right?
Right.
So it's like,
he's
what
just
is he
the Russian guy.
So he says, I'll make him like a Russian poet.
I did think it was very interesting that they chose for Kirk's kind of hero outfit for the movie exact same colors, meaning same sort of idea as the uniform that we love, but obviously without any of the rank and the kind of the fan thing, and because his loungewear when they're all over for a drink, I don't know that the movie would have been the same, or you would have been able to take him seriously with that sort of jacket, whatever that zip up was, the blue and white.
Yeah, and he was in his Russian mobster tracksuit.
Yeah, it was like a tracksuit.
Blue jumper.
But even Sulu's got that Serpico leather jacket thing.
I like that.
Yeah.
And all those carry through
animals.
All those carry through the voyage home, right?
Yeah.
Again, like what a choice.
Because they didn't want to spend any more money.
It's pretty amazing.
Well, look, a lot of people say, your favorite trilogy, is it Back to the Future? Is it Indiana Jones or Star Wars? To me, I look at 2, 3, and 4 as kind of a perfect trilogy too, as well, I should say.
It's a great trilogy. Did anybody name that? What is the name of that trilogy? You guys should coin a term.
The Genesis. There is. It's called the Genesis.
Isn't it the Vonda McIntyre? She wrote those. She adapted those 3, right? And they're in like one set.
No, I've heard it referred to as the Genesis trilogy before.
The Genesis.
I'm in for that.
And
that's not. We can do it here. I mean,
and it's interesting because it had never been planned. You talk obviously. cinematic universes. It had never been planned. They went from movie to movie with no idea what the next movie would be. 3, it got greenlit the day Star Trek 2 opened,
Right.
and Harv Bennett knew he had to bring back Leonard, but that was it, And then for 4, when they finished 3, they had no idea what 4 was going to be until it was a success. So in that sense, they did a pretty good job of having it hold together and telling a coherent story, given that there was certainly more than some other sequels, trilogies, that they were able to tell a coherent story and it really holds together.
Let me answer a question. If I knew this, I've forgotten it. Spock saying "remember" in 2, right, which we then see again in perfect video footage. They
Right.
rented the DVD of Star
Yeah, they didn't even go to dailies and show a different angle.
When I was 8 years old, that
always
bothered
a
me.
pet peeve. Always a pet peeve. But so why did they shoot that in 2? If Leonard was so adamant that he was out at that point, why did they shoot that? And did they know that would be their way back in?
It was a pickup. It was a pickup. They added it later because the movie was testing so well, and they knew that it was going to work, and Leonard was having a good time making 2, and they had a good feeling. So it hadn't been filmed when they originally shot that scene, and they picked up, and they didn't know what they were going to do with it. They just needed something that gave them an in to explore it later, which is what they did. Obviously
They added the shot of the tube on Genesis too, right? That was also
that was the last thing they shot.
I knew
So
that
was that
later.
like, was that Nick's idea? Was it, we don't
No.
know?
He
No.
didn't want to do it,
He
right?
hated it.
He didn't like
He
that.
hated it.
Yeah.
Bob Sallin went and shot the stuff in San Francisco Park because
I meant the remember. Yeah, I know he didn't like the tube on the planet, but was that, because that's such an interesting thing that you'd have to be like, shit, come up with something that we may use later that is so like you couldn't watch the 2 movies together and not think it was on purpose.
Yeah.
Well, because people were having such a good time with Wrath of Khan, but then it ends on such a bummer note that's, Spock died. And so people were like, loved the movie, but then they were leaving the theater depressed. So they needed a hopeful something that would get people to feel like, oh yeah, he's coming back. And that's why they had the tube on the planet, so that there was this, it could end on a hopeful note as opposed to sort of this, oh, Spock's dead and he's never coming back.
But you know what, though? I don't know that. I think you could have done Star Trek 2, never had, like, I don't know that you need to look at Star Trek 2 in retrospect of Star Trek 3 and go, the reason why there's hope and you kind of like it at the end is because you feel like Spock could come back. I think that those changes were ultimately good, and that feeling that there is hope and that, there are always possibilities. I think that works on its own merit. I think that runs on its own steam. Like Star Trek 3 didn't have to bring Spock back, and it would not have changed the way that I felt at the end of Star Trek 2, which is that
You felt young.
that bitter. Exactly. You do feel young. You do feel like that bittersweet, you've lost something that's important, but there's something about it that it's not that it's okay, it's that will be okay. And that seems
Darren,
to be the message of the movie.
Isn't that the problem with the beginning of Star Trek 3? You go out to Star Trek 2 where everyone's feeling like, I feel young, he feels renewed, he's reconnected with Carol Marcus.
Yeah.
He's discovered a son. And then Star Trek 3.
All that's thrown away. In
Well, what is he? I mean,
Yeah.
they just expected the next day he was, partying on
No, but
or like
my basic premise is that we needed some time to let the characters develop a bit after the loss of Spock. And I think that Star Trek 3 happens too quickly and too easily to press that reset button.
Now, Kevin, you would disagree with that, but you like the fact that it literally happens hours after Star Trek 2 ends.
Is it hours or is it days?
Days. It's probably
Hours
days.
would seem like days, but by the book.
Maybe it's instead of hours.
Yeah, it's days. I mean, because it's limping home.
It's limping, and they've done the repairs. They talk about
Yeah.
the repairs are complete.
But David and Savick are on another they've been on
Yeah,
that
they've
for
already
a while,
gone.
so
Yeah, that's true.
Feels like
but
it's
I think
months.
that happens once they've gotten back, obviously. So
But I like that. I buy that it's it's been whatever it's been, a day or a week, a couple of days or a week, and Spock is not there, and you're processing that loss. And as you get closer to home, where you spend much of your time with him, going back to Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco, it's gonna bubble up. And I love how mad Kirk is that somebody busted into Spock's quarters.
He was on the verge of obsessive behavior.
I also think that the film, what's interesting about it in that way is that it continues a lot of the thematic, some subtle, some less so, ideas of two in terms of the age of the real characters, the actors, the characters, where they are in their careers, time passing, and this sense of being outmoded, which, you know, I think carries through the minute they get home and Cartwright's, I'm not Cartwright, what's his name?
Robert Hooks is Admiral Morrow.
Yeah.
Morrow.
Yeah.
You know, oh, sorry, we're decommissioning the Enterprise. You're not, you know, we're decommissioning the Enterprise, and there is no refit, and they're all going to go their separate ways. And even one of my favorite moments in the movie is the little piece between Uhura and that dude in the transporter room.
Mr. Adventure?
Yes, Mr. Adventure.
It's so with Mr. what?
Mr. Adventure.
Yes, Mr.
How he's built.
Where it's a great, you know, where he says, obviously she's there for the plan, but he says, you know, that maybe this is great for someone like you whose career was winding down, and they do this great cut to her just flicking her eyes up at him.
Yeah.
And it was this whole kind of idea of these kind of generational, but also just the weight of the things that were on these characters, and that everything, what Morrow says to him in the bar, the scene could have been a little bit better, but the idea that, you know, your career has always stood for rationality,
not international chaos,
intellectual chaos. I didn't think that was where I was like, I don't know what that is. But that notion of you're going to throw it all away.
Nichelle Nichols is great in that scene. The guy who looks kind of familiar, right? He was in other things, but he feels like he's like in Revenge of the Nerds or something.
Yeah, he's
the great thing about it is that he later becomes an incompetent captain. So he continues that grand tradition.
Right. I want to ask you guys, but while we're on this, because Uhura, in the novelization, Uhura stays behind for a reason. She's there to foul up communications so nobody knows that the Enterprise has gotten away and they can't dispatch ship. That's all great. Do you feel that she's underserved?
Yes.
You know, she has a great scene in the Steel and the Enterprise, but they don't send her along with the guys.
I remember going, why isn't she getting on the, you can set it and then get on the pad with them.
Yeah.
But then I also love when she goes, all my hopes. I love that.
It's sweet. Yeah. It's sweet, but you know, she's basically, okay, just meet us at Vulcan and we'll see you later.
It would have been nice to see some of that, meaning I did like everybody. She's so good in the film and she's so good when they're all together. It is a bummer not to have her there. And then on the other hand, you know, you sort of realize the way the ship was set up in terms of what needed to happen, you know, it's sort of weirdly having less of them was more dire, less of the crew. Yeah. It was more dire. But it would have been neat to see her, you know, continuing, because there's a lot of things that, you know, they warn the Grissom that they're coming there, but no one else can kind of get there. It might have helped a little bit just to see her kind of doing that, fouling up communications, or sort of, you know, scattering Starfleet's plans to go after them.
I think that's another reason for all the goodwill this movie gets, because it serves this, for lack of a better word, the Seven Dwarfs, the ensemble, so well. You know, Sulu gets a great moment. Chekhov doesn't so much, but he had in the last movie. Uhura gets great moments. So all the supporting cast, Scotty gets great moments, and they're all true to character, which is another reason I think that people really respond to this movie, much more so than Star Trek II, where Chekhov gets great stuff, but it's only because he's not on the Enterprise that he gets good stuff to do.
I'm beginning to, what's bubbling up for me in this conversation, which I'm enjoying, is that the movie, this undeserving movie gets a pass only because of great scenes and great and great actors and great use of the characters.
Cinematography,
that's all.
Emotion, that makes you
great
cry.
score. He gets a pass.
I just want to say before, Mark, on that point, before we get too far away with it, I think it's very interesting when you read those reviews and the kind of contemporaneous accounts, because I actually think, you know, we miss the time where subculture could be subculture, and that there were things that didn't quite pierce the mainstream in the same way, which gave I mean, again, Star Wars was obviously it's a different thing, but Star Trek, and we've talked about this before. Part of what was always great about it was that it wasn't for everyone all the time, and
it
that
feels more personal.
that it could be something for the people and certainly all the fans that kind of kept it alive in the 60s and 70s to make the motion picture, and then threading that needle of the movies where having to basically be the first real TV serial experience to be in a big way to be translated into cinematic form. That's really hard because you inherently have to give up certain things about which have always been the debate about these movies. They didn't do enough of what this show did. But on the other hand, it did the right thing that we all wish we could do all the time, which is it just made it about the characters. And that simplified almost everything else around it, sometimes better than others. I mean, there's things obviously about Nick's direction that are incredible in 2 and writing in 2. But that part of what made this movie, even watching it again, was how it just leaned into all of them in their ways. And you mentioned DeForest. He's so good in the film. And the idea of, oh, this was that green-blooded bastard.
Yeah.
Son of a bitch. He did, this was his revenge for all the arguments we've lost. Like that it's him is the one who has to hold the Katra. That Kirk's basically has to throw away everything he stood for without even batting an eye because he has to do it. Like all of those things are like, and then it has to destroy the Enterprise, like which by the way, I was rewatching the teaser. I forgot that they put the the shot of the ship blowing up
being
at the
destroyed
end of the trailer. It made me so mad.
And in all
made
the
Harv
commercials
Bennett
on
and Leonard
TV.
Nimoy mad too.
I remember that. I remember
the
that.
final voyage.
Even the notion that there was no internet back then, so things weren't as horrible as they are today. I'm a believer in that. But people knew even before the ads, right? People knew they were destroying the Enterprise and got mad. People knew that they were going to kill Spock and did a letter writing campaign. So there were ways. I don't know if they were fanzines or fan clubs or just the conventions. There were ways that people figured things out, and the small community would get super upset about something.
Those leaks were tracked to a certain office at Paramount.
Oh yes, I learned that
belonging to the previous executive producer.
I did learn that on this very show.
They came from Gene.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I proved that too in 50-Year Mission, because it always been suspected, but we got the evidence
lowdown
for it. Yeah, which is really interesting.
But one of the things that went around when I was in the 80s and the early 90s is the even movies are good and the odd movies are bad, right? That was kind of, and even reviews would start to call that out around 4, 5, or 6. And I contend that even in my own head, Star Trek 3 gets maligned because it's an odd and the odds were bad. So 3 must not, and yes, 3 is not as good as 2 or 4. But it is really, really a good movie. And I agree with you, Ashley. It is when you cut to Savick and Merrick, and when you cut to that, if they had just shot on location, if they had just shot the Genesis planet on location, boom, right? The quality goes up.
Totally.
I want to talk about that, but first I want to give Ashley a chance to respond, and then I want to talk about why they didn't shoot on location and how, to me, that is probably the single worst decision that was made on this film.
So I want to talk a little bit about the Seven Dwarfs, and say, number one, I would argue that until this film, these characters, with a few exceptions, right? Scotty certainly had some great moments in the original series. But for the most part, we don't think about the original series as being an ensemble show. It never was. It was a three-hander, and these other guys were there. And which is not to dismiss, any of them at all. I love them. I have tremendous affection for all of those characters. And I think they're all great. But if you look at where their great moments happen in Star Trek 3, they all happen in the context of stealing the Enterprise. when they all have something to do. This is putting McCoy aside. They all have something to do in that sequence. And once you get outside of that, right, it's why I'm okay with Uhura. Like, we just wave goodbye to her. She did her job. She had her moment. It was a great moment. Now she's out. Because if I guarantee you guys, and you know I'm right in your heart of hearts, if you had shot all of the business with her screwing around with communications and there were no stakes to it and nothing happened because of it, you would have looked at the cut and gone, nope, we got to kill it because it doesn't actually add anything to this movie.
Yep.
It's nice to have and to sort of know that you did it and feel good, but and it maybe works in a novel, but I think it actually takes away from one of the virtues of the film to say that, we should have had more of her, because if anything, once we are off to Genesis, we kind of lose, the significance of the seven dwarfs in that movie.
Well, Sulu does eyeball the cloak ship. I mean,
he sees the bird of prey.
I mean, they have stuff, but it's not a great scene. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, oh, okay, that's so character specific, as opposed to "Don't Call Me Tiny," which is
it's
terrific.
a great example of the power of editing, because the Stealing the Enterprise scene was originally cut up. It was intercut with a bunch of other stuff, and it didn't work. It wasn't until they realized they needed to put the whole sequence together as one caper, as an Ocean's 11 thing, that it suddenly comes alive. And obviously, I'm sure Horner's music also elevated it.
What was it? What was it intercut with? Just stuff that
I think the stuff on Genesis.
On Genesis? Oh,
yeah.
The Terrence Malick cut. There were lots of shots.
Because God knows I want to see more of them on Genesis, because that's a dynamic
You actually
group.
make me think of something I'd never thought about before. That if you imagine the room where, whether it's the studio or Hard or everybody else going, wait, we got to make another one, but we can't have Spock in it. That they were making a Star Trek movie with, I mean, when you talk about how they all have stuff to do in a way that you don't have Leonard, that must have been in concept before you just, what a weird thing to be like.
But you have them on the one sheet with that
light bright given what you're just
original
saying
poster they had.
I love that.
That Star Trek is basically Kirk and Spock, and then Bones sort of as the third part of it.
Yeah.
And they're both kind of, one is out completely and one is kind of,
out of it.
Well, it almost was more, because in the original draft, Kirk was under house arrest and Sulu was putting everybody together, and Bill was not having that. He's
I want to talk about that one too, man, because look, I get the whole, we come home and we're all sad and all of that shit, because you know what, you would be sad. Mourning is a process, it's all that good shit. But I feel like what happens in that movie is, it starts off with everything is bad news, and then they get the news about Spock, and it doesn't really change the trajectory of anything. It's not really good news. It's just more like, oh, you're a dick, so it's more bad news, as opposed to, and I think this is kind of to Darren's point, that starting that movie in a place where people felt like they could get on with their lives, right? That there were possibilities, that things could be okay, that they weren't coming back, and they're not being mothballed, and they're not being retired, and not everything is going to shit. And you think things are going to be okay, and then Sarek shows up, right? And he says, hey, guess what? I've got some really bad news. You have unfinished business back there, and now you have to make a choice.
Yeah.
I feel like the energy would have been different at the top, and I would feel different about that film. And that suddenly these characters are being asked to make a choice and make a sacrifice.
Didn't you just describe Avengers Endgame?
Sorry, go ahead, Terry. I cut you off.
I was going to say that's kind of Avengers Endgame, right? They all move on. You spend the beginning of it moving on, and then suddenly there's the time travel opportunity. So it's kind of that. That's why I wonder, for me, I think it's perfect as is. I think that the fact that you're being decommissioned, the ship is done, you're out, you have this avalanche of no's, and then it's now, but we have to go. I think probably what you needed, and maybe this is what they're implying with the sort of it being a galactic controversy, is a time clock. Because if you say it was 4 years later, right? Spock's tube has just been on that planet, I guess, for 5 years.
Now he's 80 years old.
Well, right, but would he be able to be regenerated? But I understand the the move on thing. I just
Look,
think it's a different movie.
Once you start bringing magic into the equation, which Trek 3 does, you can make up anything.
We call it Vulcan mysticism. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's correct.
Star Trek's always had that, though.
No, it hasn't. There's
It's mind melds.
mind melds
That's
can be
different.
Mind melds can be sort of explained by contact and energy transference between the Vulcans with their highly evolved
Souls.
The
They're
whole
highly
notion of
evolved.
the whole notion of the Katra you're calling magic there?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far because we dealt with it.
There's no rabbit hole. They have
No,
the
well, in
ability to read
the Gene
people's
Roddenberry
minds
notes
with their
episode, because
hands.
Gene Roddenberry, if you remember, Steve, eviscerates the Vulcan mumbo jumbo when we did the Gene Roddenberry's notes about this to Harv. And this is just a very short version. He says, I can't believe there have been many Planet Genesis effects around before, certainly even fewer involving a Vulcan. And this can hardly avoid being a very special thing. Hey, here's another victim and his mindless body. So let's climb to the steps to the temple on an old Mount Whatsit again and put his consciousness back in his body. I mean, he's not wrong. You kind of have to go with it or not. And I think, we went with it. But yeah, Gene's right in saying this is like potentially a step too far for Vulcan, mysticism. The idea of the Katra and this ritual.
I mean, people were switching bodies and consciousness in every other episode of the original series.
Not the good
Janice Lester.
Exactly.
Right? That'd have been a real kick in the
Not
pants
a good
twist
episode.
ending. You find out that it's not Spock in there.
Right.
It's Janice
Right.
Lester.
By the way, Gene had our backs on this thing about the Grissom too, because one of my favorite notes of his, and then was, when are you going to stop depicting Kirk's beloved Starfleet as a Pirates of Penzance Admiralty? Which is also another.
What do you
really,
have, Mark?
great-
How do you have this? You have those are Gene's notes.
We have a
These are
whole
real.
episode on his notes.
That's a
Most of them
great
are terrible.
episode. That might have been the first full episode I listened to because it was, really great.
And those are his letters to Harv or like
Yeah.
It's his notes to Harv. It's Harv notes back, which basically entailed no, 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 and the
It'll give
studio's
you
notes
PTSD,
as well.
Terry.
But now the studio actually had pretty good notes, as Steve might
The
recall.
studio
Yeah.
did. Gene didn't.
No, you keep saying
Gene
that. Gene's
did.
notes actually were pretty damn good for most of them. Some of them were ludicrous, but
what were the studio notes that were good that helped?
you got to listen to the episode because I can't recount it here, nor do I remember.
Is it episode 192? 171? Just point me.
They'll get back to you.
Look,
I can't go in
let's talk
order.
let's talk about this movie because one thing, Mr. Back to the Future fan is and as we all are, of course, but not all of us have a DeLorean. Christopher Lloyd. Now, the original hope to cast this role had been Edward James Olmos for Scrooge, and it ends up being a Christopher Lloyd. What do you think of his performance? How would the movie have
Can
changed?
I just ask you before
had
you
it
get into
been-
that? What happened with Olmos? Did he pass or he just?
No, that was I think it was Leonard's idea, and Harv didn't like it, and then they came up with the Christopher Lloyd idea, and Leonard liked that idea, and so they made the offer to Christopher Lloyd. Because people forget, it's sort of like now people don't remember Ricardo was better known for Fantasy Island at the time, and it was really weird seeing him as Khan. It's the same thing with Christopher Lloyd. People forget he was on Taxi every week back then, and people were used to seeing him as Reverend Jim. I actually think the performance is better now than it was then because of the whole Taxi of it all. But what did you guys think of the depiction of the Klingons, which were originally going to be the Romulans, and Christopher Lloyd? Terry, I'll start with you because we'll go back to the future.
I obviously love it. I love Christopher Lloyd. I think he's a great villain. I mean, he was the villain in Lone Ranger. Remember that old?
Oh yes, Butch Cavendish. Yes.
Yeah, he was. And
in the Legend of the Lone Ranger.
Yeah.
Wow, there's a deep cut.
Yeah.
Bill Fraker directed that. The
I
one
feel
movie he ever
Dexter
directed.
coming on.
Wow. Okay.
I love a larger than life Star Trek going. You just had Khan who's chewing it up. And I feel like he chews it up, but he's also what I felt this time watching it is he's a fucking psycho. He's clearly not he's already in trouble with the he's like a rogue Klingon because he's talking about how the Klingons are negotiating peace, and he's like, I'm not for that.
Yeah.
So he's clearly on his own. He's charismatic. I like his little, I give you 2 minutes for you and your gallant crew. You know, he's insane.
Got a dog?
No, because you wish it. Like there's so many
exhilarating, isn't it?
That I use in my daily life from this movie. Get out of there! Go!
That's one of the best lines. That line would not have been as good if anyone else had played that part.
Right.
Yeah.
And that alone makes it.
Edward James almost would have said, "Get out of there."
Yeah,
that would have been it.
I think he's amazing and hateable, and I love the fight, even the cheeseball fight on Genesis with him, and I have had, and I find also, I think it sort of set the tone for Klingons actually all the way through Next Gen, certainly with the Neela, the bird
look of them.
Yeah. And the feeling of I even like that dog thing that it's
You're very charitable.
I look again, it's I was 9. It's one of those things that I'm always going to love. Is it over the top? Is it yes? Is it a little cheesy? Yes, but I think it's perfect for what this needed to be.
I like the three of them, and I like the three of the Klingons, and I like obviously the lead up, which I'm sure we'll get to the countdown, which is one of the greatest sequences in any movie, certainly any Star Trek movie. And it's Christopher Lloyd and it's John Larroquette. And you guys know who the third guy is?
No,
don't remember him.
So when I first came to Los Angeles many years ago, and I was interned at a company, and the woman I worked directly for, when I was sort of a second assistant, and the first assistant was a woman named Kathy Liska, who was great. She was married to is still married to a man named Steve Liska, who's very cool and is that third Klingon.
Wow.
So he's one of the first sort of celebrities that I'd ever met or seen. I couldn't believe it, because she was also a Star Trek fan, so we could sort of talk about Trek. And it came up, oh, by the way, my husband is, and he has a name, I can't remember his name in the movie.
He's the one that says, great power to control, dominate.
Yeah. Yep. And then says that, only the computer is speaking.
Right.
Yeah. What does it say? Sorry.
This is an Atari 2600 in 1983.
Kevin, that's all.
It says you're shit out of luck. What?
That's a great
good.
That's when they needed Mike Okuda desperately. If only Mike Okuda was a little
Mike is
older.
on the movie. Mike.
But he didn't do those graphics because they're awful.
Well,
and I mean, I hate to penalize him, for not having good computer graphics because it's 1983. But look at the Genesis wave. That's brilliant, right? And
nice they played
animation
in its entirety.
That's right.
I do like that the destruct code is consistent with the original series.
Would let that be your last battlefield? Yep. So great.
Destruct 0, destruct 0.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I do remember.
It just blew us up.
This is one crystal memory I do have coming out of the movie, thinking, not to paraphrase Spaceballs, that's the kind of code an idiot would have in his luggage. Like I was just like, wait a minute, that's it? Like you can just
password 1 2 3 4.
Cool? I love that it takes 3 officers.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's you need 2 keys to do the thing. I always love that.
It takes 3 to make a thing go right.
Well, I want to ask you guys because potentially Genesis is a real, Star Trek always did allegory in an interesting way. And Genesis was a chance to deal with like potentially nuclear proliferation. And of course, to have this character of Carol Marcus. And when Ashley was speaking earlier and talking about wouldn't it have been interesting to see maybe their life and then suddenly Sarek emerges into this life. I mean, had we seen Kirk with Carol Marcus and the son and seen the life that could have been, but
that would have been to bring her back for just
it wasn't. I mean, Harv insisted the studio wanted her back, and Harv was the one who didn't want to bring her back because he needed this plot where David cheated. Basically, the Kobayashi Maru did the same thing as Kirk, where he put the proto matter in the mix because he had to have this thing go wrong, and he was afraid, was like, she complicit? How would you explain it? He couldn't figure it out, because I mean,
That's
Harv,
fair.
for all that he did right, was still very mired in a TV way of thinking, in an 80s TV way of thinking. And
I actually think it's okay. Meaning
Yeah, I
it's
think so.
part of what I whether that would have been an issue or not, I don't really know. But the simplicity of it, not just the meaning your mileage may vary in terms of whether you like picking it up, a few days later or not. I thought it was pretty good, but just how much like I said, the stealing enterprise doesn't even have it happens in minute 40 something, and yet it's still a pretty streamlined set of events that keep very close to the characters and less to the sort of situation. Everything is about either either Spock's loss or how to get to Spock. And I think that is really good, simple storytelling. And I think that's one of its strengths, looking at it again and kind of going, not how would we do it today, but just it's really character focused, which is all you can really ask for when you are making a movie where you have to economize and figure out what new environments look like and whether you're only going to use once and all that. You don't very little of it's on the bridge, and you just, I think, want to be in their world and kind of what's going on with them. But I didn't get to say anything about the Klingons. I want to say one thing, which is Maltz.
Boy, Chew. Sorry.
I was like, I love that he's just like, you said you would kill me. I lied. That I was like, oh man, I wonder what happened to that guy.
Yeah,
He
right.
carried the best idea of all, which he just pitched me before the show, which is, wouldn't it have been great if he had to take them in the bird of prey into Star Trek 4 and like to Earth?
Right.
He's just along for the
I
ride.
No, but
it,
if it was if the 4-hour version is he comes along, gets free, ends up in San Francisco, like does the thing.
exploring a lot of,
I
I love everything about that.
I just like that they had to take Vulcans are like, we're not taking them. Like, what, you can't
Yeah.
leave them here. You're not leaving a rogue Klingon here. And he's like, all right. And then the guy's like, I thought you were taking me to, he's like, well, we're gonna take you to the past.
You got the whole sitcom planned out. This is
It's
did. I
Maltz
always
Adventures
thought-
on Earth.
I always thought he was just in this brig and
the whole time.
They leave him out in the cargo
They came
hold.
to-
Forget
That's what you
entirely.
do.
He's
That's what you
drowned.
do.
He's at the bottom
When
of the
they're-
San Francisco Bay.
Yeah, when they're crashed in the bay, you just cut to the brig, and he's just sitting there looking around.
They're out there splashing each other and having
Yeah.
fun. And he's drowning to death.
Terry, when you put the bird of prey into the museum, they dedicated
Found the
They found a dead
Yeah.
Klingon in
The
the
little
brig.
dead Klingon skeleton.
Steve, you talk about this being very simplistic storytelling, and I think that is part of
I
my
didn't
problem.
say simplistic. I said streamlined and simple.
Yay. My
There's
problem
a
is
big
this is very
difference between
simplistic, streamlined storytelling. And I think that Harv had a problem that he had to resolve, which is we got to bring back Spock by the end of the movie, and it's a fairly elegant solution, but there's not a lot.
But
of
he had to
there
throw
there.
David under the bus to do it.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that, because of course David cheated, and he couldn't be innocent in Harv's opinion. He had to have done something that warranted being killed.
Right.
And I'm not sure that he needed to earn his death, because it would have been tragic nonetheless. And
Well, that he deserved to die. I don't think that's it, but
No, but it's more like, I think, taking the curse off of it a little bit.
well, that's what
but
that's
I mean,
what
And
Harv
his
would say.
and his final heroic act of saving the other two
Yes.
is a good moment.
It is
but
a good moment.
It's
for
how
the
it's
character.
led up. It's led up
You know what?
again
Can I
by
just say the sound of him being punctured by the
Oh, yeah.
knife
Who-
bothered me since
rough.
1984. It's like a you're a burst or something. It's always
They
bothered
must
me.
have had Christopher Lee as a technical consultant.
But it's also very Hitchcockian the way he shoots it, where he has in the
Yeah.
foreground the plant. You can't see it. You only see the knife go up,
Yeah.
but you don't see it make contact. It's
well,
well,
resets.
it's well
And
done.
how
Now,
much
so-
better is that entire scene, that entire sequence, if BB Bish is in it? If she is helping to drive that, if there's actual conflict happening on that planet between mother and son who fucks something up and help to create this entire
Yeah.
problem. I mean, how much more? I mean, and you also have somebody who has real charisma in those scenes.
It's a different movie. I mean, then you got
It's
to
a different
have a
movie.
mother
Yeah.
watch her son die, and then if you're
Right.
not doing that scene,
but this
Yeah,
is
but
what
it's
she
okay
always
to
wanted
have
to
a-
avoid by keeping her away from Kirk.
That's
Right.
right.
But it's
there
okay
you
to have
go.
a
But I mean,
father
it-
watch his son die.
Yeah,
Is that
but
okay?
you know, he knew him, but he
really
didn't
watch
know.
it. He was-
You know what I mean? Like you could get away with he's gonna
He
fall
was a
on his
deadbeat
chair.
dad, so he didn't care anyway.
That's
There.
I confess it's the
Go ahead,
one of the things that I as shocking as it was and is, and maybe it's slightly, you know, kind of compounds by merit metric.
Yeah.
That's what we call them, metric.
It's
You know, it isn't
metric system.
necessarily the most, you know, charismatic. The way in which that all unfolds in terms of sacrifice, yeah, sure, he does kind of throw himself in the way of the knife, so to speak, and is the one that dies. There's a part of me that always sort of wished that if the story was about his fault, you know, sort of his mistakes made in the creation of Genesis, which was billed as this, you know, life-changing invention, that it some way be a sacrifice that was more about either all of them or like he dies with the planet or something, you know, something
right.
where
Right.
it was a more, because again, it's not something that was set, it couldn't have been obviously set up in two, that this thing, you know, because it wouldn't have fit there necessarily.
It should
But
be a
it
more
is introduced
thematic
sort of
relationship. Yeah.
halfway through, and you're just like, okay, yeah, he protomatter, okay, it was unstable, which, because we're not feeling that good about the Genesis planet at all in this movie, so it's not really that much of a loss in a way, because you're not like, this is the new thing that we're hiding. So it was sort of, how do we kill him? You know, how do we get rid of him in a way that's,
Though
and I
cactus
guess that
farmers
was
were very excited by it.
the what?
The cactus farmers.
Oh, he's talking about the matte painting of the cactuses, which brings us back to Kevin's point earlier that why did they not shoot this on location? This is an example where I think they needed to go to the mattresses. Obviously, it was a budgetary decision, but Harv needed to fight. But again, coming from TV, of course, we'll do it on a soundstage. It'll be fine. And he needed to fight to go to Hawaii, like the DP was begging them. Now, they said, well, we had to have all these when the planet destructs, we had to do all these trapdoors and be able to build under the stage and, you know, do all these explosions. So it made it very difficult to go on location. But, you know, it's not 1968 anymore. And it's like the film would be so well served by going on location for the Genesis planet. It would have just helped enormously. And it could have opened up the movie. And I think it just would have.
You could have gone on the stages after the lighting change at night, and that would have been completely fine.
Yep.
Fair.
But alas,
Harder to control, I
Alas,
guess you'd say too, is that it's not just the cost of going, but I imagine the conversation was, given how much has to happen, both in terms of the, you know, the switching from, you know, environmental zones, and then when things start to go south for the planet itself, and things, how much they would have had to have created wherever they were. I don't know. I mean, yes,
You'd have to make it snow in
the
Hawaii.
movie would have had an entirely different feel, and actually would have felt after two, which was just basically the cave, all created on stage, that it would have really, you know, been
Open
huge.
it up.
But
Yeah.
Well, the cave in Star Trek 2 should have been the impetus for them to go on location for Star Trek 3.
Yeah.
All they had to do was look back at Star Trek 2 and see how bad that set and the matte painting was. There was one thing in Star Trek 2 that
Really?
just
I love
is.
it.
can I cook? Can't.
Well, no, the reveal is fine, but you know the stuff with the waterfall and all that is terrible, and it should have sold them on.
The beer sign waterfall left a lot.
Yeah,
to be
but that
desired.
was supposed to be a fake environment, right? I mean, it was a constructed environment. It didn't have a sky, right? It's in that cave,
right?
So I sort
but
of.
it has a sun.
Oh, I forgot that.
Does it?
This has a lot of really expensive lighting.
Yes, lights.
I mean, look, the budget.
Holographic sun. Sorry.
The budget was
That's right.
understandably extremely tight, but at the same time, you know, they were able to reuse a lot from Star Trek 2, including a lot of the costumes, and you know, a lot of the props, except for Chekhov.
Right.
And it just is like, you know, you always make that one big decision, or you're going to go, you know, and this would have been the decision to make, which was, you know, to go on location. But I don't want to
obviously being honest, with a new director who was inexperienced, they wanted to have as much control as they could possibly have, and shooting on a stage makes that happen.
Can I ask you a question? Well, I guess all of you, but it would probably be you, Mark. It's true that and I'm pretty sure it is, but I just want to ask that Sulu was meant to be promoted to captain and was meant to get
It's in the novelization, I think.
Look, it was shot.
He deferred to. Was it in this one or was it in?
No, it was in Star Trek 2.
Star Trek
it was
2.
shot. It's a
Right.
terrible scene. Takei says that Shatner intentionally undermined, tanked the scene, which is not what happened. If you've seen the footage, it's just not a good scene, and it was superfluous and unnecessary, and
Where's the
slowed
footage?
down the pace of the movie. And there was no reason to include it. It didn't buy them anything. And
footage is out
There was nothing in the novelization for 3 about
Yeah.
Sulu.
there might have been.
There is.
I mean,
it's in the novelization for sure that he's up for Excelsior, or at least not up for Excelsior, but that he loved it and was up for being a captain.
She's supposed to have Transwarp Drive.
Yeah, he's into it.
Wheel should be a wagon.
I mean, I haven't read the novelization since I'm 14, so I can't tell you one way or the other.
Oh, who's the Treksperts now?
Yeah, who's the Treksperts now? See, this is
Same
this
as
is
it
true.
ever was.
Have you guys ever spoke? Speaking of the Klingons, I'm realizing one of my affinity for that bridge and for those Klingons is related to my 12-year-old, when I was 12 years old, taking a trip to Universal Studios Hollywood. Have you ever spoken about the Star Trek adventure on this show? Where you
Only once.
We've mentioned it.
Yeah.
We haven't really gone in deep because it's one of those things that your memories of it are better than what it was.
Oh, for sure. But it was right. You would go onto the set. You would recreate a scene.
Right.
The scene where he shoots the guy for blowing up the Grissom. And I was a volunteer, and you go backstage and you put your little Klingon hat on,
Right.
forehead, and they teach you that when you get shot to fling it back,
Right.
and so it flies off your head, and then the audience laughs because they think it was a mistake. It was early lessons that everything is fake. Everything is set up in the biz.
Forget all you know.
Exactly. And you could buy a video cassette.
Video.
So
I was just going to ask you.
We had this video cassette, which is now unfortunately lost, of 12-year-old me on this this
man,
bridge with a Klingon forehead flying away.
That's awesome.
See, I got in the thing. I have the VHS from when, but I was on Starfleet. I wasn't one of the Klingons. I was one of the crew that they pulled up on stage to do. And you get beamed too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Naughty beamed me twice last night. It was fantastic.
Easy.
I don't know if that VHS still works because I haven't, but I have it.
How long was that there? Dude, I had
it was a few
pendant
years,
and a hat from it.
Many years.
Long. Yeah.
It's where Shrek's Big Adventure was, and now it's I think Puss in Boots, but it was there for many years at the park. Not as many years as the $6 Million Man Tunnel, which is now King Kong, but that was and then the Battle of Galactica, but it was there for a long time.
Speaking of the Klingons again, one other small thing that I noticed just as you were talking about it.
Why, Steve, you didn't go on this ride at Universal? You can't talk about it.
I didn't get to California until much later, but
go ahead.
We didn't have it in New Jersey, sadly, but I did not notice this before, but noticed it this time. First, I always loved that the film, when the Klingons were by themselves, they were speaking Klingon and it was subtitled, and you did not have the Hunt for Red October moment where, you sort of transition for the movie. And then it was very clear that when he's with humans, when they, were talking to Kirk or whatever, he's totally comfortable speaking English. But there is a point in the movie, and I think it's right around the self-destruct sequence where they stop speaking Klingon on the ship.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they're just speaking English to each other. And I was like, oh, I guess at that point you don't really think about the logic of that, but they just stopped. But I was always so impressed that they had let the gag go on for so long, and that those actors had to memorize, all of that Klingon, and use it for comedic effect and use it for, a lucky shot, sir. And he's just, anyway, it's just that then it stops. I thought that was so interesting.
I love the fact that Mark Okran came up with an entire language that actually worked. Of course, now it led to, for years later, fans standing around barking at each other in Klingon, which is enough to make me want to choke a kitten sometimes. But I love that he did it. And when I was in college, I took a linguistics class. We had this whole thing just about inventing languages, and invented languages like Klingon. And it's like, so Klingon is a subject, object, verb construction, and just all these things. There's no infinitive to be, which made things complicated in Star Trek 6 when you've got to, quote Shakespeare. So I actually, that's one of the things from Star Trek 3 that I really appreciate in terms of the world building, is they came up with a whole freaking language for no reason, except for Christopher Lloyd to say stuff.
A quick shout out for the Klingon language in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which was actually made up by Jimmy Doohan.
Just making up words.
They cut this out of our commentary on Trek 1 when we did it years ago. But Jimmy Doohan actually came up with those lines, and he is dubbing those Klingons.
Wow.
And it's amazing. He did an amazing job. Yeah.
Since we all watched the movie, presumably again recently, I want to ask each of you, I'm going to ask you what you liked more about it, what you liked less about it, and sort of a closing remark. But before I do that, I want to read the last of Janet Maslin's wrap up from her review, where she says, the Star Trek saga remains a television series at heart, even in its widescreen incarnations. For all the fancy effects and sprawling panoramas, the scale remains small. The disadvantage to this is certain visual blandness, even tackiness, to the story's more grandiose settings, is well outweighed by the intimacy that exists among Enterprise crew members and by their seriousness and avidity about what seemed to be the silliest minutia, a blinking sign, for instance, that reads life form, while scanning the Genesis planet. That's what longtime Trekkies love about this series, and it's still here, a little the worse for wear, but mostly untarnished. And in a way, Terry, is that a lesson for people making Star Trek today? It's all about the characters, isn't it?
I think it's a lesson for everything, right? I mean, if it doesn't work emotionally, you're not connecting to any of these things, then it's not going. I think maybe that's probably the major criticism with motion picture is it's just not a very emotional film.
Don't tell Darren that
at all.
No, I love it. Now let me say that with the caveat, and I love it. Like, I'll put it on right now. Come on over, we'll do it. But
watch it with the sound off, or watch it score only. Is there a mode? Can you do that?
Yeah. There is actually
4K and just
there is on the 4K.
Only? That I would
but
do.
Look,
yeah.
I agree with all of these statements on the released version of the film.
Is it on this one?
Absolutely.
By the way,
yes, it is.
Just, for years and years, I would say everyone maligned Star Trek 5 for good reason.
Right.
But push comes to shove, I would take 5 any day of the week over 1 because of the characters, because they sing "Row, row, row your boat" around a campfire, because they eat marshmallows, because Kirk says, "What does God need with a starship?"
Yeah.
Have you watched the 4K version of Motion Picture?
Yes, and the director's cut, and it was much better. It was much better than I remembered. But I do not care about
you don't care about Spock coming to terms. You don't care about Spock coming to terms.
I like that.
With
I was very
half?
surprised at that. I was very surprised at that. I was like, oh wait, there actually was a character moment in this movie.
There absolutely.
But the amount of time spent on the two characters that were not the two characters I care about.
Here it comes now, Con. They're going at it.
Well,
only a matter of time.
In the offing.
Darren, this is like the 12th round. We're
all friends here in the final.
This is like when Rocky switches to Southpaw. Switches back.
I
He's
only
not getting
hope
killed. He's getting mad.
But isn't that the great thing about Star Trek is they really don't have to, like, you can have the hardcore science fiction motion picture, right? Yeah. But for me, it's about the crew as the family in every way. So I totally get the Star Trek 5 thing. In fact, I think we should do another one of these called In Defense of Star Trek 5.
Oh, God.
Absolutely.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
I'm right there.
I was just going to say that because this is the 40th anniversary of Star Trek 3. It's the 35th anniversary of Star Trek 5. And as you know, we've gone out of our way to champion that movie for a lot of the reasons that Star Trek 3 works. It's an episode. It's not a movie. it's a good episode. And Star Trek V is unfairly maligned. Kevin, you cited so many of the things about it that work because the effects are so bad and people can't look past that. It's the same thing on Star Trek.
Score. It's got a great score.
It's an amazing
The
score.
return of Goldsmith and that Shaka Reed music is just,
Yeah.
And
A busy man.
and the song, I even got into
The songs of
Moon-
Distant
what is the
Hearts.
song?
Ahura.
The moon
Yeah.
is the stairway to heaven.
Stairway to Heaven, yeah.
No, the moon is a window to heaven. The stairway to
A
heaven
window.
is
No
Yeah,
Star
Stairway to Heaven,
Beyond
something
Time,
else.
the
but,
guitar store.
You know,
I heard Ralph Winter's interview on this show and thought it was great, and he obviously talked a lot about that and about the VFX decision on 5, which was a lesson. I do want to say, being a Trek fan my whole life and a Star Wars fan my whole life, there's no difference to me. You can love two things, and I do.
Absolutely.
And there was one name I would always see on the Trek movies. It was Ralph Winter. I didn't know who he was, but I thought that name, that's what I want to be. I want to be like that. I don't have to. Nobody has to know who I am or be up on a stage necessarily. I just want to be able to be a part of things that are cool and that people like me respond to. And then when we were doing X-Men 1, they hired Ralph Winter, and I was like, holy mackerel. He's so nice and kind and low key.
Yeah.
I don't think, but I couldn't believe that I was working with Ralph Winter on that movie, and then got to know him.
I have a similar experience because Ralph at that same time made an overall deal with us at Fox, and I would do the same thing. I would go to his office and sit, and he'd be so generous with his time, and and he's such a good human, and still loved and loves the process in the films. And that's the kind of stuff where again, when you get that kind of opportunity to talk to people, like that's when you guys had your Bob Salen piece, that's the stuff we get excited about, the folks that actually do it and kind of we're there, and are not the stars, we're not have a different recollection or different kind of experience of it, but also just like, I think, to correlate what Kevin's saying, like that you could be a nice guy, like you could be a good person, love it, and still practice. I always found that really inspiring about Ralph.
I remember we were in pre-production in West LA in an office that Fox put us in, a small suite of offices for prep, and it was Ralph was leaving early, and Ralph did not ever leave early. Ralph was there early to late. And I said, "Oh, where are you going?" And he was going to DeForest Kelley's memorial service.
Oh, wow.
Which again, is having no connections to Trek whatsoever, I thought was meaningful. And then I got sad and started thinking about the time when they would all start to be gone.
Yeah, it's amazing when you look at this picture how many of the cast, are gone at this point, and it's sad, but it's so. Ralph's so great. Harv needed somebody like Ralph because you see what Salen did on 2 and what Ralph did on 3, 4, 5, 6, and Ralph was getting it done. And this is something that we say, to a lot of the fans who only want to hear what the actors have to say. Somebody like Walter would be on the picture for 5 days. Nichelle, maybe a few more. Even Dee, he's not there every day, and when he is, most of the time he's in his trailer. These people like Ralph Winter are there in prep. They're there every day. They're in post. They're the ones who have.
They know things not even we know.
The keys. They can tell you everything. Yeah. They know everything. They know where the bodies are buried. They know how these things got made, what they did right, what they did wrong. That's why they're the gems, the people that we want to talk to, as opposed to, not that there's anything wrong with talking to the actors, but they don't know.
Yeah.
He was always, Ralph, I say what? I mean, he whenever we talked about it, he was not, it's not that he was unsparing, but he was honest. Like he looked at each one of these movies and could look back and say, this was right, this was wrong, and tried to use that understanding, that experience to inform the next one. And I was like, oh, okay, that's how you do it. It's like, you can't, it's like you make one movie, you're like, we did it. And then your reward is generally you get to do it again. That's it.
That's
like,
right.
If you're lucky,
Absolutely.
Do it again, cheaper.
You just get to keep going. That's the only victory. And that's not something before you start working in the business that you understand how to appreciate, like, and how to find joy in just that. I mean, like, hey, you gotta love doing it. And Ralph was one of the first, one of the first people that I knew that was working at a studio, and it was just that really embodied that. Who had been through different seasons of his career and was now kind of in the middle of X-Men, and still was having fun. And I thought that was really great.
You know what
This is
Ralph
not-
says? The movie that Ralph did that he gets a lot of attention for now, or comes up. I don't remember if you mentioned this on your show. Hocus Pocus. Ralph
Right.
Winter produced
Right.
Hocus Pocus, and it came and went. And now I think when it comes up, that's the movie people want to talk to him about.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That is
Yeah.
generational.
It's amazing that's a film. Yeah, it got no attention when it came out, and now it's like this beloved classic.
Yeah.
That's what I love about film, right? Is that it grows, evolves. Wizard of Oz was a disappointment when it first came out, right?
Yep.
We all know, and I think that's true. And you can revisit it like we all did today with Star Trek 3: The Search.
Terry, you wanted to say something?
Speaking of Hocus Pocus.
Well, I was just
Come on.
the people who were there every day. Mike Okuda started on Star Trek 3, was there every day in the art department, and recent Steve and Kevin know this. Mike's like, will you help me go through my old stuff, these boxes he has in his garage? And you would literally open up a box and there'd be like 10 file folders on the Go Climb a Rock shirt that Kirk wears in 5, or the Good Morning Captain graphic in 3. And call sheets and memos about everything and how much work. I mean, we've all made stuff, and we all know like one tiny scene could have them 20 meetings behind it that you don't know. But Mike kept all of it, and just going through it, he's like, I don't understand. Like, I would sit there for hours, and now like 4 or 5 hours pouring through all these documents. He's like, why do you find this interesting? I'm like, this is incredible. Like,
Living
like
history.
It's yes, it belongs in a museum.
Fine.
But
They got their top men working on it. It'll be fine.
right.
Top
But
men.
the amount of the visuals of the bridge and how much that carries through all the way from 3 to Next Gen and beyond, to Picard season 3, that the Akudas are responsible for is extraordinary.
No, absolutely. And that's why when I was writing 50-Year Mission, it was like, I said, it's like Trek archaeology. When I find all these old memos, and, when I found the famous Gene Roddenberry excoriating Shatner and Leonard for being egomaniacs and telling them what he really thought of them. I mean, it was like the Holy Grail. It was incredible. So it's so much fun to come across that stuff and those old files. I mean, I remember when I bought Cinefantastique, when we got the files for Preston's article, which ended up becoming the book Return to Tomorrow, how exciting it was to see this famous article that was never printed on Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So yeah, I mean, we all love movies and we all love Star Trek, so it's all interesting to us. So before we wrap up, I just want to let you give your closing statements as and to sum up your passion for this movie, where it might have let you down, and what you think its lasting legacy is here on the 40th anniversary, and then we're going to let you guys go. So, because I could talk about this, I could do this all day, but we're not. So we'll start with you, Terry. Well,
Mark, I'm so glad for that. Because I took little notes on my phone while I was watching it. But I mean, look, the bottom line, I think the thing for me is how ballsy the movie is. Like, blowing up the Enterprise, killing his son, even the fact that they're going to undo the death of Spock, it sort of changes Star Trek forever from this point, this movie. Because now anything goes. Now anything can happen. 5, 4, 5. But you couldn't have Star Trek 4 without Star Trek 3 in every way. Like, they're paying the consequences. They're trying to get home. You have a Spock that's not quite Spock. You have that whole arc. Even all the way to 6, with the fact that he has a personal grudge against the Klingons because they killed his son. So I think it's pivotal in all of Star Trek. In its history. I would say probably the thing that occurred to me the most, the thing that works the most against it, is the title. It's The Search for Spock. You just know he's coming back. you know,
Right.
just
Yeah.
by the title alone. I wish there was something more poetic in that regard. And I would say the only other thing I will say is the 4K gives you a spectacular shot of Leonard
Mhm.
Nimoy's chest hair during the Thor pond, and there's one hair that is like about 4 inches long.
Good.
So we can reveal that 7 of 9 is carrying Shaw's Katra now. That's how you're going to get at it.
No, yeah.
It's not happening.
Oh, I
Okay.
thought that was going to be about chest hair. I'm so glad it was.
Okay. Asbell, Star Trek 3, final closing
I
thoughts.
mean, as much as I enjoy proving Darren wrong in all of these episodes, it's more than that. It really is. I get a lot of joy out of the film, out of this conversation. No, I'm kidding, Darren. Nice. You see, you guys can't see what he's doing to me on camera at home. It's a look. I think it's kind of. I love the movie. I've always loved the movie, and love it in different. Unlike some of the other ones, love it in different ways as an adult for seeing kind of what went into it, the challenges of you know, again, a series that was kind of going to be a show again, then was a movie that worked, but then they said you got to spend a lot less, and then they gave it to Harv in the TV department. Like, it sort of had a very strange, for something so popular. We talk about IP, we talk about all the things that we seem to, you know, drive us all today. You know, that it got made with, you know, not much more money. They had to let Leonard direct it, which was presumably a factor, if not a condition, of his returning, which was a pretty big risk in a lot of ways. And I can only imagine, I mean, I know just from talking to you guys how much the Shatner sort of needed to kind of get his due on 5 and all of that. And Harv not being, you know, kind of ever thought of as a writer in the way that, you know, certainly not in the way that you guys are, and Terry and Ash and all of you guys, like, and so you're like, oh man, that guy's gonna write it like himself. That the film is so that its themes are so directly dramatized in the action, in again simple, not simplistic ways, is so powerful that the story is still about Kirk. It's about his love for his friend. It's about the fact that he will go to whatever lengths necessary, including destroying the only thing that's ever been debatable about what he loves the most, which is the
Right.
ship. He'll basically go all the way. And when Bones says what you always do, you know, turn death into a fighting chance to live, I'm like, that's what I want for my heroes. Like, that's change, you know, in a way that, like, that kind of, and to build off of how well, you know, God, to follow Nick Meyer in that way, and too, to get to the sort of something Spock was trying to tell me, happy birthday, I feel young, and then, you know, continue those themes so that it wasn't just that the story picked up where our heroes left off, but that there was growth, you know, that there was real, like in a movie that, again, like written by the producer, directed by a first-time guy, a franchise that was given seemingly less money than before to render it, and yet still hit those marks right up until the end, where, like we've talked about, we started with the end, where the suspense of, you know, oh God, is it going to work? It's going to be dangerous for you. I choose the danger. Hell of a time to ask. And then it works. And that even then you're like, maybe he's not Spock. And then he turns around and says, your name is Jim. And you're just like, that's great. Like, in terms of just how these things can sometimes come together, not come together with all the great intentions, that it comes together as well as it does, given those first time elements, is pretty special, honestly. And I do think, like we said, for me, the issue was always the sort of lack of production value for the Genesis planet. I think, you know, a little bit of I mean, I wouldn't say much in the Starfleet stuff. I didn't think that was great. I always loved the sort of, I remember it was even in the trailer, the great shot of whatever kind of, you were at some control station with a view of space dock, and then you could have the ships, and you could have, they used it again for the stealing the Enterprise sequence, and it was just, you know, man, that was so cool. Because for me, just Darren, for what it's worth, the idea of space dock having a enclosed safe space, not just from attack, but from, you know, stellar detritus, you know, to protect the fleet, seemed like a pretty good idea to me always. But anyway, but that's what it is. For me, it's special because I think it's very much a great it's a great chapter for those characters and those actors, and kind of set me up for, I didn't know, I mean, who knew Thor was going to be kind of what it was? Like we were, like I said, we were all just in the lunchroom going, what ship are they going to get next?
Yeah.
So was DC Comics. Yeah, and of course, I obviously Maltz's line, "You said you'd kill me, I lied," must have influenced Steven D'Souza on Commando.
That's right.
That's a whole nother
Kill me loud.
conversation. Kevin, what about you? Wrapping up.
Well, I think Terry and Steve have done it. I think to me, it's, and in thinking about it, it is the movie where the love between the characters becomes most apparent and unabashed for the love that they have and willingness to throw it all away to go on this mission. The heist is not just a cool starship heist. It's these characters throwing in with one another in a way that they did on the original series from time to time, but certainly didn't really do or have the opportunity to do in one or two. And I think, yes, I mean, loving Star Trek is looking past production issues, right? That's why, I show episodes of the original series to people and they have a hard time getting past the paper mache sometimes. And then you go, never mind that. Look at the idea. Look at the characters. Look at the smile on Spock's face after he learns that Jim is alive at the end of a month time. It's one of the, I rewound that maybe 50 times the first time I saw that. And 3 connects to that in the emotion and the love for the characters. And I think all of the criticisms are 1,000% justified that many of you brought up. I think a big one, I think Terry did something in his show that made me realize a inadequacy of 2 and 3, which is not caring for Kirk's son that much, right? I don't care that much about Kirk's son in 2 or 3 when he dies.
Yep.
Terry introduces Shaw, and I was biased against that character in early episodes of Picard season 3. I was like, who's this guy? Then he starts to turn. Then I care about him when he, spoiler alert, dies. And I go, how did this guy make me care about this nobody, this new nobody character that I haven't spent 40 years with, and I care about him when he's gone. And that didn't happen with Kirk's son in 3. So okay. But there is more right than wrong with the movie, and watching it, and it gets better every time I see it. I appreciate it more and more every time I see it. And now thinking of it as the Genesis trilogy, which Paramount Plus should, although they're not even on Paramount Plus right now.
They're not on.
No, they're on Max.
Yeah, weird. But they should have I love having been a part of a franchise made up of 30, soon to be 34 movies. Yes, they're all in a row, but I also think that we have trilogies within them and series within them. So the notion of the Genesis trilogy being sub-labeled on Max or Paramount Plus when it goes back to it someday, I think would be cool.
And of course, Star Trek obviously looms so large in all our lives, and it'd be great to have a conversation at some point about, because we've talked about this before, the influence of All Good Things on Endgame and Star Trek in general on what you do. Steve, we've talked a lot about how Star Trek has influenced you, and obviously we know the influence of Star Trek on Terry. And Kevin mentioned how wonderful Shaw was, but of course you did not repeat the same mistakes with that wonderful performance from Ned Spielers as Picard's son, that Merritt Buttrick and Kirk's son, which was a missed opportunity to introduce a new character, which you avoided all those problems and introduced a wonderful new character to the mythology, who was Picard's son. But again,
well, I appreciate that, but again, who knows, right? Like maybe Merrick had the best audition. I've had that happen to me a million times. It's the best audition there ever was, and then try to do the best you can in editorial. I've said this before, and I'm really going to let everybody go, but Kirsty and Merritt were cast by Gary Nardino because they were the only characters in Star Trek II cast by the head of the television division at the time, because there had been plans that if Star Trek II hadn't worked, to spin them off into a new Star Trek TV series.
Right.
So he was responsible for casting those two, and you can tell because Merritt was very much a TV actor. He's he's quite good in Square Pegs. You know, so it's not that he was a bad actor, but but then also you're dealing with the egos.
Who was
you're dealing with the cast saying
in Trek Phase 2 that got that small part in the motion picture?
David Gautreau.
Yeah, Zahn.
But you're dealing with actor egos where it's like, are these guys going to replace me? So nobody was rooting for Kirsty or Merritt, and they I think that's also part of the reasons why they're away from the main cast for so long, too. But anyway, that's a conversation for another episode.
Like, can you imagine how satisfying it would have been if Kirstie Alley was all the way through 6?
Yeah,
that turn when it's
Darren would have liked 6, but if she would have.
Right.
Actually, you're
not
correct.
Like 6, Steve. How do you not like 6? That's shocking to me. Shocking.
Because there's racism in the Enterprise crew.
But
let them
That's
die.
the main reason. Yeah.
Well, I'll send you the episode where he loses.
Yeah.
That's what you get for missing staff
My
meetings.
opinions are well documented, sir.
But I
you're the intellectual puppet of the Federation.
I hope
we're much less fiery offline. Just FYI.
I hope you'll all climb the steps of Mount Slayer with us again to talk about Star Trek V, because that will be one for the ages. But this was great.
I just want to say
he doesn't want to let it go.
I don't want to let it go because part of the joy. Look, I know we're going long, but part of the joy of being able to talk about Star Trek with other people who are just as passionate as you are about it, and being able to have different opinions on things, is what makes this all work. It's the joy of going to conventions back in the 70s and 80s. It's the joy of talking about things online. It's about talking with your friends about things that you all love. And that is what makes this wonderful.
You're here.
And this was a wonderful discussion with some wonderful super fans. Terry Matalas, Steve Asbell, Kevin Feige. Thank you so much for joining us for this 300th episode of the Treksperts. This was one for the ages, and I'm so appreciative for everybody spending so much time with us today to talk about the lasting legacy of the search for Spock. We went in search of, and we found some interesting. We found Bigfoot. So thank you guys so much.
Guys. Congrats on 300 episodes.
Yeah.
Congrats on 300. You guys are doing a real great service to fandom in general, but obviously particularly for Trek. And it's really, I'm glad it exists, and look forward to 300 more.
Oh God.
My goodness. Thank you.
Anyway, on behalf of all of us, thank you to our audience, and we'll see you next week for an all-new episode. Until then, Steve, you want to take us out? Steve Asbell?
Take her out, Mr.
Asbell. Keep on trekking. Ingloriously. At least. Of course.
Yes.
I didn't
engage. Take 2. Okay, we'll see you next week.